Open a traditional compilation of the Quran, and you're met with an imposing wall of text. Starting the traditional order with Surah al-Baqarah feels like wading into deep water. You are hit with page after page of dense, unrelenting regulations, complex mandates for statecraft, detailed rules for writing debt contracts, and strict penal codes. By placing these macro-level systems first, the traditional order presents the text as a static book of laws, masking the fact that these regulations were actually the final step in a decades-long process. But if you take those exact same chapters and reorganize them into the actual order they were revealed, the reading experience changes. By using the chronological academic translation by scholar Yaşar Nuri Öztürk, we can read the text exactly as the first community experienced it. Mapped over 23 years, the text stretches from a static block into a timeline of real-world events. It reveals 4 phases of construction, a dependency matrix where every tier relies on the structural integrity of the one beneath it. The text serves as a real-time architectural blueprint, constructing a civilization from the ground up, where every phase requires the prior one to function. That construction begins in Mecca. This was a densely packed urban environment, deeply stratified by wealth and tribal power, and it desperately needed reform. Phase 1 starts at the level of the individual human intellect. The first revelation, Surah Al-Alaq, doesn't mention statecraft or laws. Its first command is simply read. The texts that follow immediately after, like Muzammil and Muddassir, focus on psychological endurance and personal purification. The goal is to build individuals strong enough to carry the weight of what comes next. Once that internal resilience is established, the timeline moves into Phase 2, the cultural shift. The text pivots outward, focusing on how these individuals treat the people around them. Chapters like Duha, Ma'un, and Humaza deliver aggressive critiques of the local elite. They condemn the hoarding of wealth, the mistreatment of orphans, and the complete neglect of society's most vulnerable members. Yet, throughout all of these social critiques, there is zero mention of state laws, prisons, or police enforcement. Before a single piece of legislation was written, the text spent more than a decade exclusively engineering human empathy and individual morality to ensure the people were equipped to handle power. The community then migrates to Medina, and the scope of the project expands. The population is growing, and they now face the practical challenge of governing a functioning society. This triggers Phase 3, the political entity. Now we see the introduction of administrative frameworks in chapters like Nisa and Azab, outlining the rules for defense, forming treaties, and organizing public life. The third political tier securely locks on to the human and cultural tiers beneath it. If administrative power is handed to leaders without prerequisite empathy, the system fails. Finally, the structure is capped with Phase 4, the economic ecosystem, introducing strict financial regulations. You can write the strictest economic regulations, but without a pre-existing moral framework, people will always find loopholes to exploit the system. Politics and economics are positioned as the roof of this civilization. They provide shelter and stability, but only if the walls and foundation are already standing to support them. This sequence offers a clear framework for understanding why so many of our modern attempts at top-down reform suddenly collapse. We often see attempts to implement Phase 4 economics without having done the work of Phase 1 human development. When heavy systems are built on top of unrefined human behavior, the structures fracture under the weight of human corruption. The chronological sequence demonstrates that in this blueprint, legislation is not the starting point, but a result. Instead, it suggests that a system's long-term durability is directly tied to the exact order in which its components are introduced. This 23-year progression provides a model for organizational change, where the individual's perspective is the primary building block for the larger state or community. You cannot skip the steps. You cannot bypass the foundational work of individual intellectual awakening and expect the larger society to function. True societal transformation never starts with a new piece of legislation or a new currency. It begins with the human mind.